History remembers the kings who won wars, the generals who burned cities, the empires that expanded across continents. But behind the celebrations of victory, there was a darker ritual few chronicles openly described. When kingdoms fell, their queens did not simply disappear. They were often brought before the public, stripped of power, forced to walk through enemy streets, displayed as symbols of a conquered world. Crowds gathered, soldiers celebrated, and the once powerful women who had ruled beside kings were turned into living proof that an entire empire had collapsed. This was not just punishment. It was political theater, a message meant to echo across nations. Your rulers are broken. Your kingdom is finished. And your future now belongs to US and ancient and medieval warfare. Victory was not complete until it was seen. Conquering armies did not simply defeat their enemies on the battlefield. They staged triumphs. Grand public displays meant to prove to the world that a rival power had been crushed. Cities were looted. Royal banners were burned. And sometimes, the most powerful symbol of all was the defeated royal family itself. Queens, princesses, and royal mothers represented the heart of a dynasty. They carried the bloodline of kings. They embodied the legitimacy of a throne. So when a kingdom collapsed, conquering rulers often placed these women at the center of their victory celebrations. Captured queens were sometimes paraded through enemy capitals during triumphal marches. The crowds that once feared their authority now watched as they walked under guard through unfamiliar streets. For the conquerors, this was more than cruelty. It was strategy. Displaying a defeated queen sent a message stronger than any proclamation. If even the royal family could be captured and humiliated, then resistance was pointless. Entire populations understood the meaning instantly. Their world had changed. Their rulers had fallen. And a new empire now stood above them. Yet for the women themselves, the experience could be devastating. Many had spent their entire lives inside royal courts, surrounded by ceremony, protection, and political power. Now they faced crowds not as queens, but as prisoners. Their jewels might be removed, their royal clothing replaced, their authority erased in a single public moment. But even in these humiliating displays, some queens maintained a quiet dignity that surprised their captors. Chroniclers occasionally recorded how defeated royal women walked calmly through hostile crowds, refusing to bow their heads, refusing to cry, refusing to give conquerors the satisfaction of seeing them broken. And sometimes, that silent resistance became its own kind of legend. In many ancient empires, war did not truly end when the battlefield fell silent. The final act of victory happened in the capital city. It was there that conquering rulers staged elaborate ceremonies designed to display their dominance to the entire population. These celebrations were not only about honoring victorious armies. They were carefully designed political performances. One of the most famous examples came from the traditions of the Roman Empire. When Roman generals achieved a major victory, they were sometimes granted a grand public ceremony known as a triumph. During these massive processions, the streets of the city were filled with cheering crowds as soldiers marched through the capital carrying treasures, captured weapons, and symbols of conquered lands. But among the spoils of war, there was often something far more powerful than gold or jewels. Captured rulers, kings, princes, and sometimes queens. Defeated leaders were forced to walk through the streets behind the victorious general's chariot, surrounded by guards while thousands of spectators watched. For the crowd, this was proof that Rome's enemies had been completely crushed. For the conquerors, it was a message broadcast to the world. No throne could challenge the empire. Although detailed records of captured queens in these parades were rare, royal women were still valuable political captives. Their presence symbolized the collapse of an entire dynasty. In some cases, they were kept alive not out of mercy, but because their existence could be used to stabilize newly conquered territories. If the population saw their former queen living under the control of the conquerors, it reinforced a brutal reality. The old order was gone. A new power now ruled. These public displays were meant to break morale. They were psychological warfare. Entire populations watched as the symbols of their former kingdom were transformed into trophies of victory. Yet the reactions of the captured women themselves sometimes complicated the spectacle. Ancient writers occasionally described royal prisoners who faced humiliation with striking composure. Rather than begging for mercy or showing fear, they maintained the calm dignity expected of someone born into royalty. For the crowds watching, this could create a strange tension. They had come to celebrate the defeat of a rival kingdom. But seeing a once powerful queen walk through the streets with quiet strength sometimes stirred something unexpected. Respect. Even admiration. History rarely recorded the private thoughts of these women. But their presence in these triumphs reveals something important about ancient warfare. Victory was not only about destroying armies. It was also about controlling symbols. And few symbols were more powerful than a captured queen walking through the heart of the empire that had destroyed her world. After the crowds disappeared and the victory celebrations ended, the fate of captured queens did not become easier. In many cases, their real struggle was only beginning. Once a kingdom had fallen, its royal women were often taken far from their homeland and brought to the capital of the conquering empire. There, inside vast palaces and guarded courts, they entered a new world where every movement was watched and every decision was controlled. For conquerors, keeping royal women alive served an important political purpose. A captured queen or princess could become a living guarantee of obedience from a defeated region. As long as she remained under imperial control, rebellious nobles back home might hesitate to rise against the new rulers. Inside these foreign courts, life could be both luxurious and deeply isolating. Many royal captives were given comfortable quarters, servants, and fine clothing. Outwardly, they were treated with respect, especially if they came from powerful dynasties. But beneath the appearance of honor was a reality that could not be escaped. They were no longer free. Their homeland was gone. Their future depended entirely on the will of the empire that had conquered them. In the vast palaces of empires such as the Mongol Empire or the Ottoman Empire, royal captives sometimes became part of complex political systems within the court. Some were married into the ruling family to strengthen alliances. Others remained under quiet supervision for years, their presence serving as a reminder of the dynasty that had been defeated. For these women, survival required intelligence and careful judgment. A single mistake in a foreign court could have serious consequences. They had to learn new languages, understand unfamiliar traditions, and navigate court politics among nobles who might view them as rivals or threats. Yet despite these challenges, many royal women showed remarkable resilience. Some managed to build influence within the imperial court itself. Through diplomacy, alliances, or marriage, they slowly regained a degree of power that few outsiders expected. History records moments when former captives became trusted advisors, respected noblewomen, or even mothers of future rulers. In these rare cases, the women who had once symbolized defeat eventually helped shape the very empire that conquered them. But for many others, life in captivity remained a quiet struggle. They lived surrounded by luxury but haunted by memories of the kingdoms they had lost. The palaces that housed them were magnificent, but they were still a kind of prison. And every corridor, every guarded gate, reminded them of a single truth. Their lives had been rewritten by the outcome of a war they could never control. History often portrays captured queens as helpless victims of conquest. But the reality was sometimes far more complex. Inside the courts of powerful empires, some royal women slowly transformed their position from prisoners into influential figures. It did not happen overnight. At first, these women were simply political captives, symbols of defeated kingdoms kept under watch by the ruling empire. But royal upbringing had prepared them for court life. They understood diplomacy. They knew how power moved quietly behind palace walls. And over time, some began to use those skills to rebuild influence. One of the most striking examples comes from the powerful court traditions of the Ottoman Empire. Within the vast imperial palaces, women connected to the ruling family could wield enormous authority behind the scenes. Royal women from different lands sometimes entered this world through marriage or political arrangements after their kingdoms had fallen. Once inside the court, survival depended on intelligence, patience, and alliances. A queen who had once ruled openly beside a king now had to navigate influence through conversation, loyalty, and strategic relationships. Some managed to gain the trust of powerful rulers. Others formed alliances with palace officials, advisors, or royal mothers who held influence within the imperial household. Over time, A few of these women rose to remarkable positions. They advised rulers. They influenced diplomatic decisions. They helped arrange marriages that shaped alliances between empires. In rare cases, captured princesses even became mothers of future kings and sultans. Their children carried the bloodlines of both the conquered kingdom and the conquering empire. Through them, the legacy of fallen dynasties quietly continued. But power inside royal courts was always fragile. A single political shift could turn allies into enemies overnight. Women who had gained influence could suddenly find themselves isolated again if a ruler died or court factions changed. Still, the fact that some former captives managed to navigate this dangerous environment reveals something important about history. Royal women were not merely passive figures in the aftermath of conquest. They were often highly educated, politically aware, and capable of adapting to extraordinary circumstances. In many cases, they played subtle but significant roles in shaping the empires that had once defeated them. Their stories remind us that power in history did not always belong to those who held swords on the battlefield. Sometimes it belonged to those who understood the quiet strategies of survival inside palace walls. And among the survivors of fallen kingdoms, few understood that reality better than the queens who learned how to turn captivity into influence. When the wars ended and the great empires recorded their victories, the official chronicles focused on conquerors, generals, kings, armies that marched across continents. But the deeper story of conquest was not written only on battlefields. It was also written in the lives of the royal women who survived the fall of their kingdoms. For many captured queens and princesses, life after conquest meant living far from the lands where they had once ruled. The palaces around them were grand. The courts were powerful. Yet everything familiar had disappeared. Their homeland, their people, their throne. Despite this loss, these women often became unexpected bridges between cultures. Inside imperial courts, they carried knowledge of the kingdoms that had been defeated. Their languages, traditions, and diplomatic experience slowly influenced the societies around them. Over time, the conquerors themselves began to change. The great imperial courts of history, from the vast territories of the Mongol Empire to the powerful dynasties of the Ottoman Empire, became places where cultures blended together. Royal marriages connected former enemies. Children born into these families carried the bloodlines of multiple kingdoms. Through them, the legacy of conquered lands quietly survived inside the very empires that had destroyed them. In some cases, these royal women helped guide the next generation of rulers. As mothers, advisors, or respected members of the court, they influenced decisions that shaped the future of entire regions. Their role was rarely celebrated in official histories, but their presence left a lasting mark. Even more remarkable was the resilience many of these women showed. They had witnessed the destruction of their homes. They had walked through hostile cities as prisoners. They had lived under the authority of rulers who once stood as their enemies. Yet many adapted. They endured. And in some cases, they quietly rebuilt influence in places where no one expected them to survive. Today, historians looking back at the rise and fall of empires are beginning to recognize how important these figures were. Because conquest was never only about armies and kings. It reshaped families. It reshaped cultures. And it reshaped the lives of the women who stood at the center of royal dynasties. The queens who were once displayed as symbols of defeat did not simply disappear from history. They carried their stories forward. Through diplomacy. Through survival. Through the generations that followed them. And in doing so, they proved something that conquerors rarely understood in the moment of victory. Empires may rise and fall. But the people who survive them often shape the future in ways history almost forgets to record.